Hello and welcome back to Coffee Kurosawa, where a film obsessive sits down with a film fan to talk about film. I am Ben Filipkowski, your resident film obsessive.
And I am Farrah Sarpkaya, a person who loves film, but like in a super chill, it's a Tuesday evening and I want something on while I embroider this shirt kind of way.
Today, we are talking about North by Northwest, one of Alfred Hitchcock's, dare we say, funniest films. This is a screenplay that writer Ernest Lehman wanted to be the Hitchcock picture to end all Hitchcock pictures. Does it live up to this reputation? We shall see. Like nearly all Hitchcock films, it is a tale of suspense, and this one stars Cary Grant, Eva Marie Saint, James Mason, and Martin Landau, alongside a wonderful supporting cast. Broadly, we follow ad executive Roger Thornhill getting caught up in a case of mistaken identity, which brings him from the hustle and bustle of New York City and the United Nations building to art auctions in Chicago, and then to Rapid City, South Dakota, better known as the home of Mount Rushmore. As always, if you don't want to be spoiled by this 1959 classic, please go watch the movie. We will be here waiting when you get back. And again, while we discuss this movie, be aware that the content has some surprisingly heavy innuendo, scenes of violence, and, as seems to be tradition with movies in the 1950s, a whole lot of drinking and smoking. So far, this is, I think, your first time watching this. What would you say your first impressions of it are?
I was honestly kind of surprised I've never seen it. You're right. I was a big, like, noir old movies fan in college. And so I was excited to watch this one. Overall, I really enjoyed it. I wasn't really going into it with any specific perceptions. We'd already talked about it being a comedy before I started, so I wasn't surprised. But I was really delighted by how well Hitchcock applies the skills that he has mastered in thriller and horror into comedy. Because I mean, it's mostly just timing. Um, and unlike some of the other movies that we have watched, where the story can be a little bit simple, um, although, and we'll talk about this later, the messiness of the tale was enough to keep me interested, at least, even if it didn't exactly make sense. It also had some really cool camera work, which was always fun in a Hitchcock film. And again, I just really loved seeing how he applied it to comedy instead of thrillers. I'm going to kick us off with a short synopsis. You introduced us already to Roger Thornhill,
Mm-hmm.
um, our hero ad executive played by Cary Grant, um, and his getting wrapped up in some Cold War shenanigans where he is mistaken for a non existent, we learn later on, super spy, George Kaplan. He's kidnapped from a hotel by the goons of a traitor to the United States, and is and manages to escape with some very skilled drunk 1950s driving, um, and then ends up going into detective mode by accident when the police don't believe him that he was actually not driving drunk. Well, he was, but he was trying to escape from murderers. And so he goes from New York to Chicago via the train, and then, as Ben mentioned already, Mount Rushmore. So, under the course of a lot of this intrigue and some wonderful references that we're going to double click on in a minute, we get a very dramatic chase on Mount Rushmore and some surprisingly explicit innuendo as we fade to black. So we mentioned this is a comedy.
Yeah.
Hitchcock made a comedy. Um, and the fact that this is full of a different kind of tension. Because what are jokes but,
Yeah.
timing?
Tension and release.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So talk to me about how he uses that timing and tension and perspective and all of the fun stuff that he learned in, what did we say, like 50 different movies before this or something,
Yeah.
to make it funny.
Yeah, it's kind of nuts. This is towards the end of Hitchcock's career. I mean, he still has probably another 15 years of work that come after this movie. It's still remarkable that everything is kind of on display here to some extent. It's not necessarily. Let me rewind a second. We talked up at the top about how the screenwriter wanted to do the Hitchcock picture to end all Hitchcock pictures. And I think, in a sense, they accomplished that in that there are just so many tropes on display. There's so much stuff in this movie to the point where it almost loses its way a few times. It almost goes off the rails a few times. Mm-hmm. I don't know how this movie sticks together because we were talking before we hit record about how weird the plot actually is when you stop and think about it. It makes zero sense. Part of why it works is because you have all these kind of Hitchcockisms in place to pull you along, to draw you into the story. And it really hits the ground running. We have just tight camera work, tight dialogue, tight performances, bringing us into the action right away. We start out in New York City. We're getting kind of the hustle and bustle of the city. We meet Roger, and he's on the go. Roger is basically Don Draper. Roger is an ad executive in New York City. I believe he is literally working on Madison Avenue. Goes to a hotel to meet some friends. And this is where kind of some of the tension starts picking up, because we're starting to see things like in the composition of we've got action in the background, action in the foreground. Characters are kind of reacting to things here and there. Small little visual cues and clues drawing our eyes to where we should be looking. And it's very, to me, it's very subtle. I don't really notice it until I start to look for it. Seems a weird thing to say now that I say it out loud, but there's all this kind of stuff going on that when you stop and think about it, yeah, there's interesting techniques happening. But the cool thing about it, about the perspective side of things in particular, is that one of the hallmarks of Hitchcock's thrillers and the suspense that he builds is the concept of subjective point of view. So we are seeing everything through one character's subjective perspective. And that kind of applies to the entirety of this movie. There is, I think, one scene that Roger is not technically in. So the idea being that everything that we see in this picture is filtered through his lens. And a lot of that plays out in kind of visual gags, in the framing of things, in the kind of mix of long and slow takes that build a scene up and up. And I think, again, going back to the beginning here, we've got this kind of tense car ride out to the upstate New York, I think it is, where he meets up with James Mason and gets threatened. There's a lot of stuff going on here that I think in the heat of the moment is very kind of under the radar. But as my eyes start to pay closer and closer attention to it, you start spotting little things like, okay, they're framing this way, they are building a shot this way because they're trying to draw our attention to one thing or the other. I think that's really neat, and I'm probably rambling a bit about it, but it's all there. But simultaneously, this is the Hitchcock picture to end all Hitchcock pictures, but it doesn't really mean a lot, at least for the first bit of the movie, in my opinion. It is kind of all this comedy in service of, or all these techniques in service of the comedy bits, in service of the jokes, and setting up this plot that then proceeds at a breakneck pace.
Yeah, like, as you were talking, I couldn't think of much, if anything, other than, like, there's some people in the background, and that's kind of about it. I assumed that there was, like, a newspaper somewhere or something that was, like, George Kaplan or, like, something. I don't know. I do remember there was, and I only know this because I read it afterwards, in the scene where he's meeting his friends,
Yeah.
George Kaplan's voice goes over the PA system at the same time the waiter is walking him to get to the phone to call his mother.
Yeah.
And I didn't even notice. Like,
Yeah.
that didn't register for me. And then we have that tense car ride as these two men are showing Roger Even
He's
I'm making
not
this name.
George?
He's
What?
not George. As they're showing Roger up to upstate New York, he's just sitting there making jokes.
Yeah.
And it is the most awkward car ride because he's just like a comedian in the middle of these two thugs just making jokes. And it was great because
Yeah.
it just feels like that comedy night where the comedian just sucks. Or maybe just the audience is just
Yeah.
not feeling it today.
Yeah.
Um,
Tough
and
crowd.
yeah.
Yeah, I'm explicitly thinking of that bit because it is that the case of mistaken identity. I think Roger is sitting at a table with his friends almost in the background of the shot. But there's that mix of like the foreground action. We kind of see that there are these guys scoping out the room, but they're not like the focal point. They're there, they're present. You can notice them. There's a bit of attention drawn to them, but our eyes are immediately on Roger and his group of friends, and it's that mix of like the call for Kaplan coming over. It's just like that moment of timing where Roger is calling for the bellhop while this thing is coming through. That's like this is the thing that kicks off the plot. It is just the wrong place at the wrong time. Again, that ride up to the wonderful country house, and he's trying to make small talk. He tries to escape when they're at a red light. The score picks up and it's this dramatic like stab of music as he lunges for the door handle and it's locked, and he just sits back down like, I had to try. Like, can't blame me. And they don't react at all, which is hilarious to me.
Thwarted by a locked door.
Yeah, yeah. It feels like as I was watching it, there was so much coming in all at once that it was like, okay, what do I focus on? What is the thing to remember here? I seem to recall that there were some great little POV shots of Rogers, like quite literally, like the camera becomes his eyes for a few moments as he's looking out through the windows and trying to find a way out of the office that he's been thrown into. Then James Mason rolls in with his very James Mason voice, his very James Mason way, and basically is like the lights come to, he draws the curtains and it gets very like the chiaroscuro lighting, dramatic lighting, film noir lighting. Like the plot is already moving here. This is where it really kicks into a higher gear, I think. Their solution to dealing with Kaplan, who is not Kaplan, they refuse to believe that he's in fact Roger Thornhill. This kicks off with James Mason's right-hand man force feeding Roger Thornhill a pint glass of bourbon or two, and then sticking him behind the wheel of a sports car and saying drive.
Yeah, it's a little bit, because I'll be honest, I expected, like, obviously not real torture, because this is the 1950s, but, like, more of a, where we've got you here to question you and try to figure out what you know. But no, they straight up just, like, force feed him. And weirdly put the bourbon first in a glass and then pour it down his throat instead of just through it from the bottle, which I thought was a weird detail, but I digress.
Yeah.
Um, they want to be polite about it, I guess.
They let him choose too.
Yeah.
Like, what'll it be?
What's your poison
Yeah.
of choice?
Quite literally.
But that also is our premiere, because we, the audience, know that Roger is who he says he is, because we see him, being an ad executive, talking to his secretary, and all of these things, and talking to his ad buddies who he never finishes having dinner with. The series of absolute nonsense that gives us that mix of dramatic irony and just as the audience being like, are you, like, clearly you're trying to make a plot because you have an alibi. You were just having dinner with your friends and then you disappeared. Like, why is that not the first place you go to be like, hey, cops, maybe talk to my friends who I was trying to have dinner with and then go to the theater with immediately after, instead of being like, oh, he was at a party at our house. I was like, no, that's not, what?
Yeah.
There's so much that doesn't make sense.
Yeah. Yeah, there's no attempt to check an alibi or on anyone's part. James Mason plays Philip Van Dam. Van Dam and his right hand man Leonard at no point try to verify an identity. They're like, no, we know it's you. We
Because
know
you.
you're Kaplan because you raised your hand when Kaplan. These two goons, who you'll never see in this movie again.
No, you
Uh,
do.
you do? Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah.
These two nameless goons, we vouch for their character. They would never tell a lie, and they have confirmed it's you, so it must be you. God, it's all about mistaken identity as a theme. I think even the title of the movie, there's some allusion there to a Shakespeare line about topsy turvy identity, things like that. It's a weird start to a movie because I don't know, like I think of a Hitchcock movie as being like visually extremely rich and engaging from the jump. And this kind of doesn't become that until all this stuff has happened. For me at least. I think it's not until he is genuinely on the run because he goes to the United Nations building shortly after that, and that's really the kickoff of the plot. They think he's Kaplan. He makes it out of this, and in theory, he could just go back to his life. Like there would probably be a moment where the bad guys would be like, "Geez, we got the wrong guy. Okay, whatever. We tried to kill the wrong guy. No big deal. No one believes him. We're all good." But Roger tries to get deeper into this story to figure out who Kaplan is and to figure out who these guys are, and then is truly again in the wrong place at the wrong time, where he meets the UN envoy, who then gets a knife thrown in his back, falls into Roger's arms, and Roger, instead of immediately shouting for help, pulls the knife out and holds it like he just stabbed him in the back. And then turns as a cameraman whips up with the camera. He poses for the cameraman. It's just an incredible little. You can see it coming too. The setup is right there. As he's like, this guy's falling into Roger's arms, dead. You see the cameraman is right behind him, starts turning around. It's too silly and too good.
But I think that moments like that, if we're looking at that, I've said that too many times. If we're looking at the coin that is thriller and comedy,
Yeah.
right? Both of them dealing with tension, both of them dealing with timing and how important those things are.
Yeah.
This movie does it so well because you have moments of big tension of, oh God, this man that he thought was, I don't even remember the name of the gentleman who got killed, but who Van Damme was impersonating to use his house.
Yeah.
And he gets murdered, and oh God, Roger has been photographed and all of these things. But also, there's a moment just before the knife is thrown where the murderer is like very slowly and casually pulling on gloves.
Yeah.
And then he runs out of the building, and what I find very interesting is you just said that this is another kickoff
Yeah.
of the film, because prior to this moment, he was at the hotel looking for Kaplan, and prior to that was the moment of being at the police station and being charged with drunk driving, and prior to that was the actual attempt on his life, and prior to that was the kidnapping. And all of those moments, I think we could maybe put that pin in. That's where we're really kicking off the chaos. But
Yeah.
I mean, it's the opposite Lord of the Rings problem. We have too many beginnings.
Too many. Yeah, it does take a bit to get going, and it's tricky to really talk. For me, it's tricky to talk about those classic elements of like how's it shot, how's it, all these things in this intro section, because I don't really feel that they're there until this point, and it's when he's on the run that's kind of when Hitchcock mode kicks in a big way. Like, there's already been that bit of mistaken identity, but it's almost like it's like a different movie in some ways. I don't know. It's odd to me that way. This is the point where I'm more engaged. I think it starts firing on all cylinders for me. I also just wanted to rewind a bit, because we're talking about the difference between suspense and comedy and how there's just two sides of the same coin. Speaking of that comedy, the bit after the what is supposed to be a very tense car chase scene, the tension there doesn't exist for me. That's just I can't really get into that bit of it. But immediately after, when he's booked by the cops, they bring him into the station, and he has what the line is pretty incredible. Roger Thornhill wants to charge these guys with assault, assault with a weapon, and bourbon and a sports car, which is very. He plays drunk very well. It is very funny. I'm moralizing a little bit here that, of course, the bad guys were just trying to dispose of someone by having them drive drunk. That would be a believable exit for this character. But I'm a broken record at this point. For me, the movie really kicks off with this murder plot and everything that follows. But I think that this also kind of gets into some of the stuff that we're talking about structure. We're circling around structure a little bit and tropes, because good lord, this movie is just made on tropes. The plot does not make sense if you apply real world logic to it. It starts to fall apart. There's some silly things going on. We've talked about this. But man, there are a lot of tropes in this.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on this?
I I adore all of the tropes. So the scene where he's drunk in the police station reminded me so much of this one scene in The Big Sleep, where Humphrey Bogart and his femme fatale are on the phone to the police, and they're like, "Oh, who's this? The police? You better talk to my father." And they just go back and forth being absolute nonsense, and there's just this very similar vibe of absurdity. And then we move into, the kind of spy thriller detective trope of the sneaking through the train station, rifling through someone's mail, all of these things. We move into the mysteries on the train and the beautiful woman, the cold, icy, femme fatale. We have moments where we've got, Nick and Nora Charles being detectives together, him and his mother. It's just, I did not. There was a couple of key points where I was looking at the plot going, that doesn't make any sense at all. You lost me, man.
Mm-hmm.
But 98% of the movie, I was like, I don't care.
Yeah.
Just give me a fun little spy nonsense movie, and I'm okay with that.
Yeah.
Because it just works for me.
Yeah, it goes places. Sometimes it doesn't make sense why it goes those places, but it's always entertaining.
Yes.
Yeah, we've kind of hinted at the femme fatale here. We've talked about Eve Kendall is the mysterious woman on the train, played by Eva Marie Saint. Can you tell that Hitchcock has a type?
She's
yeah.
Amazing. She's so good in
She's
this.
so good. She and Cary Grant are fantastic in this. They play off each other incredibly well. This is, and it's on the train, I think, that I start to notice a few more fun little filmic techniques. We get, Roger's incredible disguise is just wearing some thick sunglasses. It's extremely fashionable. Not the best way to hide himself.
Certainly not inside.
Yeah, certainly not inside. He almost immediately gains the attention and affection of Eve. Their romance quickly springs up. She hides him in her sleeping car on the train. Packs him in quite like a sardine. He complains about this and requests olive oil so that he might, if he's going to be packed like a sardine, he at least wants to be covered in olive oil, I think is his line. Yeah, I love these scenes on the train. We get, again, more of his perspective, his subjective POV. He's peeking out of the windows, trying to watch where the cops are. It's just fun. It's classic. It's fun. Getting into the tropes side of it, maybe a little bit more. This is a movie that comes out in 1959, before what many people would call the sexual revolution of the 1960s, and also during a period where Hollywood censors were cracking down on any subject that they deemed to be taboo, including depictions of love and sexuality.
How the hell did this get made?
How did this get made? How did they let this through? They were fine with all of this.
For it, the number of sexual jokes and the explicitness with which she basically says, "Hey, do you want to come back to my place and have sex?"
Yeah.
is just like, excuse me, I mean, good. And it's very much, speaking of, again, like, the fact that she is the femme fatale, and usually that honeypot is very, like, flirty and, like, vague innuendo because you don't want to be too explicit and obvious about it because the spy will never fall for that.
Yeah.
Well, Roger's not a spy. And so she's just, like, fully, like, I'm unmarried, or
Yeah.
you have a very nice face. It would be a shame if you were to bring it into my train car and use it all night, like that kind of thing. And
Yeah.
you're like, girl,
Yeah.
have a glass of water because I think you're a little thirsty.
Was it, she says she never discusses love on an empty stomach. But you know, I think the line originally, I was reading up on this. The line originally was that she never makes love on an empty stomach. So it's just they're getting right into it. Roger's Don Draper, so he's not opposed to any of this. There's genuine chemistry here. As much as she is, as we learn later on, that she is the honeypot to trap super spy George Kaplan, aka Roger Thornhill, there is a real connection there at the same time, which is kind of nice, kind of fun.
The age difference, although I know is classic for the Hollywood romance, still throws me a little bit.
Yeah,
because there's at least 10 years difference between the two of them, probably more.
Yeah, because
right?
she is explicitly 26, I think.
Yeah.
Like they call out, yeah, she's 26 years old. Roger is twice divorced. And I mean, he's played by Cary Grant in his probably late 30s, early 40s.
Yeah, so probably at least 10 years difference, right?
Yeah.
So, not the worst it could be, but I definitely were like, But
yeah.
Yeah.
And this bit sets up, I think, my favorite little gag, little bit of staging. They get off the train in Chicago. He goes to freshen up and shave. The cops are searching for him in Chicago. They think he's been on the train. So he's at the mirror in the men's room. He's like, he's at one sink. There's a guy a couple sinks down from him, and just lathered up in shaving cream. And he's got the razor in his hand. The razor that has been given to him by Eve, a woman's razor.
A small safety razor.
Razor. The guy next to him has like the straight razor and is shaving normally. The cops come into the men's room, and we see all of this through the mirror. So we're seeing reactions, Roger's reaction, and through the mirror, and the actual action of the cops searching through the mirror, which is a neat little composition I love. And there's that bit of tension where, like, are they going to spot him? And then you realize, well, he's got his disguise on. He's got shaving cream on. They can't tell it's him. Immediately goes from tension to comedy as he starts shaving with the tiniest razor ever, and the camera just catches the other guy staring at him, like, in complete confusion, and Roger just, like, smiles and nods and keeps shaving. I love that. I love that little scene. It's so silly, so fun.
Well, it's followed up with her being like, "What took you so long?" And he's like, "Tiny razor."
Yeah.
Which is very silly.
Yeah.
And then comes the part that confuses the heck out of me, but also is, like, very Western standoff gun shooter
Yeah.
scene, which I thought was really cool, is when we get to the bus stop. Eve has told Roger, hey, you want to go see Kaplan? Great. Meet him at this one random bus stop in the middle of nowhere, an hour and a half outside of Chicago, and he'll talk to you. And if you think about that for 5 seconds, it doesn't make any gosh darn sense, because the person who is telling him to go here through our lovely honeypot is Van Damme's second in command. And if they think he is Kaplan, why in the world would he go to the middle of nowhere to meet Kaplan? Which doesn't make any gosh darn sense. And so he gets to this bus stop, and then they try to kill him. And you're like, what? You're supposed to be smart, though.
They keep trying to kill him in the most inefficient ways possible. I mean, I can understand that, like, we'll put him behind the wheel of a car after getting him drunk, because he's a hard drinking Madison Avenue executive. There's a line where he says he's twice divorced. And if he died, his mother and 2 bartenders would be very upset because they depend on him. They keep trying to kill him in the most. They're cinematically interesting. They're ridiculously inefficient. They send a crop duster after him to run him down in the middle of nowhere outside Chicago. It looks cool. It's an incredibly tense and fantastic scene. You get that building dread, these long takes of the plane dusting crops where there ain't no crops, according to the guy waiting at the bus stop. Bus comes and picks up the only other guy there and leaves, and this plane starts getting closer and closer, and it kind of cuts back and forth between Roger getting increasingly concerned and the plane getting closer and lower. And it's a cool little chase scene that ends with, I'm still not sure how that plane crashes into the fuel tanker, but it does.
I think, so the way I read it is this crop duster also for some reason has a machine gun on it, because I guess it's a murder...
It's a murder duster.
Tool? I don't know. And so they're trying to shoot him, and then they try to dive bomb him instead and just hit him with the propeller, I guess. I don't know what the goal is here. And so the driver of the plane, or the pilot of the plane, swoops down to hit Roger, but the truck gets super close to Roger to the point where he almost gets hit by it. He just lies down instead. And the plane hits the fuel truck instead. And there's just so many parts of that it doesn't make sense. It just doesn't. It was a completely unnecessary, the most unnecessary explosion also, because the pilot would have been able to see this 2-tanked oil truck and pulled up, but no. Why?
Yeah, you know that scene in Austin Powers where Scott Evil is talking to Dr. Evil? It's like, why don't you just shoot him? At this point, that's like the best solution, right? Like,
they tried that with a machine gun on the crop duster.
I mean, I can't stress enough. I love this movie. This movie is fantastic. It just doesn't stand up to a lot of close scrutiny, just from like a logical perspective. It's doubly strange because the villain of this piece is kind of presented as a communist sympathizing academic, wealthy. Is he an academic? I don't know. He's very wealthy. He's got connections. So maybe he's just dumb. But he's played by James Mason, so why is he dumb? This makes no sense.
I just really love the way they apply these absurd scenes to build and destroy tension. So after this happens with the crop duster, he finds Eve again. conveniently in a hotel where supposedly Kaplan had been staying. And he goes into her room and he is like, I'm going to go with you. We're going to figure this out. But he doesn't trust her.
Yeah.
And she's just like, you have to leave. And we, the audience, get the sense there's more to it. I think this is where, like, before I had my suspicions, but this is the moment where it's like, she's definitely the spy, right? She's the spy that this weird, shady organization is protecting. But we have so many cute little moments of, like, he goes and takes a shower, quote unquote, because he's listening for her to leave. And he does the trick with the pencil to find the address she's written down on a notepad and all these things. Mm-hmm. And then we find ourselves in an auction house. And it is the most, like, Three Stooges, Marx Brothers nonsense.
Yeah.
And I love it. Like, this is another one of those moments that, like, don't really make sense, but I don't care. Because the way Roger plays the room for laughs to escape the murderous intentions of Van Damme are just so good. He pretends to bid on this very expensive $200 art because 1954 money. And the scene is just chaos with everything that's going on as Van Damme and Eve depart from the auction, and he makes himself get arrested by being an idiot.
To save himself from the hired goons. Creates the biggest scene possible. And oh god, I love it. I love this so much because, like, you can tell what he's trying to do pretty quickly, but everyone else is just too polite to do anything for a while. It takes him causing, like, just the biggest scene and then interrupting other people and then punching a random guy in the face to have the cops called on him. And oh god, it's just it's so good too. It's this incredible bit of physical comedy. He winds up, cracks the guy in the face, and then is immediately apologetic and starts, like, shying away from getting punched in return. Yeah. It's a great little moment. He gets picked up by the cops, and then we just to jump back to earlier in the movie, the one scene that does not have Roger in it, that he's not privy to, is I think back in, like, it cuts to, like, a room in Washington D.C. I think it was.
Of course it is. It's the FBI.
Yeah, the FBI or the NSA or the CIA.
The alphabet soup.
The alphabet soup, as the professor describes it. It is literally just, like, a bunch of spies talking about, like, so, like, we can't just let this guy die, can we? Like, he's taking the heat off our agent, and that's great, but, like, we gotta help him, right? And the professor's like, do we, though? Do we? Again, coming back to after the auction, incredible comedy there. Gets picked up by the cops, is immediately like, God, you guys took so long to get here. You're going to be heroes. And they're like, okay, shut up, pal. And he's like, no, I'm a murderer. See? I'm on the front page of the news.
He's so excited to be like, I killed somebody at the UN.
Yeah,
aren't I cool?
Comes clean immediately. And they're like, sure. They have to, they wind up phoning it in. They get redirected by the professor, the alphabet soup of spy agencies, to drop Roger off at the airport. The professor comes clean and explains everything to him. We do not hear any explanation beyond the stuff that we can already figure out on our own. Half their conversation is deliberately drowned out by the airplane engines, the diegetic noise, diegetic sound effects, which is just another goofy, like, here's this incredible spy thriller, and don't you want to unravel the mystery? There's no real mystery. Like, these are bad guys. They have a microfilm. They're trying to get away with the microfilm, and Eve has to go with them to protect her cover. That's it. It is Kaplan does not exist. He is made up by the spy agency, and Rogers again just a convenient patsy right now. So
And I love that the blanking out of the full explanation
yeah,
feeds so beautifully into the fact that this movie makes no sense whatsoever. It because like I mean Hitchcock's a good filmmaker.
yeah,
The writer is a good writer, and it's so intentional to be nonsensical and
yes,
just point at all the silliness, and it
yeah,
makes fun of itself so well in that way.
yeah, and it is a very silly movie in so many ways. Like the title, North by Northwest. That is not a direction on a compass. I did not know that because I guess I'm a fool who does not understand how compasses work. But you can go northwest by north or something. I don't know. It is an inversion of the proper direction. Is my understanding. I could be extremely wrong and just have terrible reading comprehension skills today. That was my takeaway from it. But it could also be a reference again to like a line in Shakespeare talking about a character, their kind of mental state being upended now and then. Some of the alternative titles for the movie included "In a Northwesterly Direction," because it was going to the climax was going to be in Alaska at one point. I think that they really missed an opportunity because they were going to call it like "The Man Who Climbed the President's Nose." I think was another one. I don't know. It's
If
what a
they were
goofy, yeah,
if they were gonna call it that, they better have called it "The Woman Who Climbed the President's Nose in Heels," because let's be honest, that was far more impressive. That Eve was climbing Mount Rushmore
yeah,
in a pair of kitten heels.
yeah,
Like,
yeah, and all this stuff has been really to this point in the movie. I think a lot of this has been kind of I don't want to say rote filmmaking because it's really well made. It's competently made. It's extremely competently made, but it just doesn't have like some of those elements that I would associate with Hitchcock. There's not a ton of visual flair. There's not a ton of that suspenseful stuff going on beyond using those things, deploying those things for comedy purposes. But it's when Roger realizes that Eve is in fact, one of the good ones, the movie really shifts and becomes a proper suspense thriller at that point. And then the lighting becomes ultra dramatic when he is infiltrating Van Damme's house. I love the lighting and the framing in those scenes. We kind of get a real sense of the physical space that these characters are inhabiting. And we also get this wonderful bit of dramatic irony where, by this point, Eve has tried to fake Roger's death with the blanks in the gun and the very public shooting at I think like the visitor center at Mount Rushmore. And so he goes off to save her because they're slowly cottoning on to her true identity. And it's just I love that scene. This entire scene is very tense to me. It uses that kind of like Rogers in shadow peering through windows. We get a lot of stuff directly from his point of view, so it's almost like he's looking directly into this room where Van Damme and Leonard are as they're learning a bit more information about Eve, and he keeps looking over to Eve, who is getting packed up to flee to Europe with Van Damme. And then we get the gun with the blanks behind Leonard's back, and it's kind of set up for a second. Like, is he going to shoot Van Damme? Is he going to be like? Is this going to be a twist where he's the real villain? What's going on here? And then it goes into direct, like first person shots of Leonard drawing the gun on Van Damme and pulling the trigger. And Van Damme like flinches, realizes it is firing blanks, immediately punches Leonard in the face.
My favorite part about this scene is that at this point, we saw the gun way back when
Yeah.
in Eve's purse. We saw it again when she shot him. We see it again behind Leonard's back. And then we see it again, not a few moments later, in the hands of the housekeeper. And there's a huge amount of tension as Eve is being shown towards the plane.
Mm-hmm.
And Roger has been like, don't get on it. They're going to kill you. Period. Full stop. And even though I had seen this gun filled with blanks multiple times, when the gun went off, I was like, oh no, the gun went off. Or he was being held hostage at the end of a gun. And he didn't realize for like a solid 3 minutes
Yeah.
that it was a gun filled with blanks because it was the same gun. And I'm just like, this is an absolute mastery of we have expectations when we see a gun in film. It's that Chekhov's gun thing, right? Where if there's a gun, it's going to go off. And you think that, oh, a gun means someone's going to die. Not a single person. Because it's full of blanks.
Yeah.
And until the very end, that the presence of a gun is just nonsensical. And then we get the moment where Roger is holding Eve's hand on Mount Rushmore, trying to save her. And Leonard is standing on his fingers to make him fall.
Yeah.
And the sheriff shoots Leonard with a real live bullet. And the professor says, not really sporting using real bullets. You're like, what?
Yeah.
Just the cherry on top of all the nonsense. Beautiful.
Yeah. And like for all the kind of tropey ridiculousness of the plot, when it is the like, I feel tense watching those final scenes on Mount Rushmore. I feel tense watching the slow burn build up to, oh, they're on to Eve. They found the gun with the blanks in it. Like, again, like, this is where it goes like full Hitchcock right away. I love it so much. It's so good, and it just moves.
But then we end. I loved the cut between him pulling her up the mountain and then him pulling her up onto the seat of the train into the bed again, because she's Mrs. Thornhill now. He has made an honest woman out of her. And then we get the most explicit sexual innuendo I've a train going into a tunnel, and we fade to black, and I'm like, whew, two people on a tiny bed where we have already confirmed that they have had intercourse previously in the film before they were wed and it was legal. What a ridiculous place to close this super serious spy thriller. Not serious spy thriller, but you know what I mean. Like, where Jaws had the unsatisfying ending of no closure, this gives me all the closure I want. The spy that was in danger in Van Damme's organization is safe.
Yeah.
Van Damme has fled, but whatever. We don't really care. We expected that to happen. Leonard is gone. The cops believe Roger. Everything is fine. Everything works out. And someone got married. Marking it as a true Shakespearean comedy. And roll credits. And I just... it's beautiful. It's such a good ending.
I mean, you know how, like... You know how we were talking about how there's no symbolism in this movie? Well, there's one big symbol at the very end. And it's not subtle in the least.
No.
It's... I do truly love just... Yeah, there's a wonderful kind of movement, and there's no kind of falling action after the climactic scenes on Mount Rushmore. It is... We're going to have one little wrap up. Train goes into tunnel. The end. What? It's just a train going into a tunnel. It doesn't mean anything else.
That's when you go to the censors and say, It's not my mind that's dirty. It's just a train. They're just on their honeymoon. I don't know what you're talking about.
I was reading up on this movie, and apparently on the commentary, an old commentary track, they were talking to the editor of the film, and they're like, "Wow, like, what a great idea to like, what a great symbol to close on. Was that your idea?" And the editor like groaned and said, "No." Like, this is apparently Hitchcock snuck this thing in at the end.
Just like Roger.
So,
Oh,
oh
okay.
boy,
Um,
what a movie.
what a movie indeed. Okay, so all that to say, it sounds like this is a pretty good film to learn about tension, but that can be said of all of Hitchcock's movies, I think.
Truly.
So why is this movie the movie to end all movies of tension, if it is? I mean, that's an assumption.
I think if maybe not the movie to end all movies about building tension, but I think, am I going to say it, a great movie to start building tension with. This is a great kicking off point for if you want to watch Hitchcock movies. This is a fantastic one to start with. This is accessible. It is entertaining throughout. It is James Bond before there is James Bond. It is a very, not quite a jet set adventure, but it has that. We're going to a bunch of different, maybe not exotic locales, Chicago, New York, and what was it, Rapid City, South Dakota? Maybe not the most exotic locations in the world, but they are nonetheless interesting and engaging settings for action to occur, for the story to play out. And yeah, I think that there are certainly better examples of Hitchcock's ability to build tension through visual cues, through shot composition. It's on display here, but maybe not to the extent that I always want, that I would be looking for. But I love this movie all the same because of the characters, because of the performances, and how everything comes together. I recommend, yeah, I recommend watching this as a wonderful starting point for getting into Hitchcock movies. You can go backwards, you can go forwards. You're not going to be disappointed.
Incredible.
And I think on that, I would ask you, if you're looking to just watch something on a Friday night, what makes this one the one to watch?
I think the thing that makes this a movie that you can just kind of throw on is exactly what makes it something to start the Hitchcock journey with, is that it's so just, it's fun, it's relatable. I mean, relatable in the sense that it's not like a big complicated plot that you have to like stare intently at and then rewind every 20 minutes to be like, what did I miss? Because it's so fun, because it makes so much fun of so many different tropes that in a modern context you probably recognize from other types of media, you're still going to get a lot of the jokes. You're still going to understand like what they're referencing even if you don't know the exact references. And I think the lack of that really high art style makes it more just a fun romp. Similar to how we talked about Star Wars being just a fun romp. This is just like a goofy spy movie that will make you laugh and that has some great acting and has about 5 minutes of Cary Grant without his shirt on. And I'm just like, sure, why not?
Yeah, it's it's not quite a summer blockbuster, but it kind of has that feel.
Yeah.
And it's got those I think the way I'm thinking of it is that it's kind of like, you want to watch a suspenseful movie, you can go right into Psycho after this. You can watch Psycho. But this kind of has that nice tension and release. There are these tense moments, and then you get some comedy to lighten the mood. And that's a great mix in my books.
Truly. So, which movie are we percolating on next week, Ben?
I am so excited for this. We are going to watch Seven Samurai. This is our first subtitled movie. This is our first Kurosawa movie we are covering on this podcast. And it's a long one. This is going to be gosh, I can't even remember the runtime. I want to say it approaches 3 hours. There's an intermission
Oh my lord.
in the movie when you watch it, so be prepared for that.
I have been warned.
You've been warned. This is going to be so great. I am so excited for this. And like Star Wars, this is going to be a hard one to focus on like one theme.
So where can we find you?
You can find me on the internet under one of my social accounts. You can find me at Cafe Cartography on the Instagram. I'm still in the process of getting a few social accounts set up for this lovely podcast. More on that to come later. Farrah, where can we find you?
I am on the socials at Farrah Sarpkaya. No longer on Twitter/X, but on Instagram, on Threads, on other things. I'm also on LinkedIn, which is a weird one to say, but it's because I'm a voice actor. So if you like my dulcet tones, you can also find me at sarpkaya.ca and hire me to read things in a beautiful voice. And I think that takes us to the end in a tidy 1 minute, or 1 hour and 1 minute. Well done, us.
Go team.
I think we're getting the hang of this.
Go team. Go us.
Heck yeah. Well, can't wait for Seven Samurai. And lovely listeners, we will talk to you next time about coffee and actually Kurosawa.